Welcome. So, this little video vlog in which I talk about my experiences on the Delta has now blown over into its third video. Apologies. Unfortunately, this always happens to me. I think I'm just going to make one video, I'm just going to talk for maybe 20 minutes, and then I get rambling and rambling, and I always underestimate the amount of time it will take me to say what I want to say. And there is definitely a lot to talk about on the Delta, particularly as you get into Module 2. There are a number of different assignments that you can talk about. There's the criteria for the lesson itself. There's a criteria for what they call the LSA, which is the research essay, which accompanies the assignment. There's a number of reflection essays which are not graded. They're just based on completion. So I guess people are less concerned about that. There's the experimental lesson. There's the amount of peer observations we had to do. We had to observe 10 hours of peer observations and write reflections on what we observed. In my Delta group, one of the people taking it with me was very upset about the amount of work we had to do just writing up peer observations. He did the tally and he found out that the amount of words we had to write on peer observations was more than any of the other assignments once you added up all 10 observations. I didn't mind it myself actually because even though it was a lot of words, it wasn't graded particularly harshly. In fact, it wasn't graded at all. It was just done on completion. So I would just sit down, I would type out whatever came into my head when I thought about the lesson I had just observed, and I found it fairly painless work to do. But point being, I guess there's a lot to get through on the Delta, and I I could probably talk for a long time talking about everything, although all this information is already available online and other places talking about the criteria and how to pass Delta Module 2, etc. I'm determined that this is going to be my last video. I'm not going to spill into 4 videos on this topic for a couple of reasons. One reason is that spilling into 4 videos is always a sign that I'm rambling way too much. And two, I've got a lot of other things to do this week. Even though we're in lockdown here in Vietnam, I'm still teaching remotely and need to spend a lot of time preparing stuff on the computer, etc. So I stopped yesterday's video just talking about maybe the experience of passing lessons versus failing lessons. And just to recap briefly what I said at the end of that video, I passed the lessons comfortably. Now, I wouldn't say I did it effortlessly because I worked very hard all week, just like everybody else did. I spent ages planning everything and trying to design all these perfect materials and searching through Google to find the perfect image for the PowerPoint and practicing the lessons over and over again before I actually did them for real. Just in my apartment, practicing the delivery. Um, but when I did the lesson, when I talked to the tutors afterwards, it was always a pass, and I got the impression that it was a comfortable pass. Like they were saying, "Oh yeah, you passed." Like that was definitely a pass. Now let me balance that out by saying that I never got any merits. I never got any distinctions. It was just your basic pass. And I did, as I mentioned in the previous video, one of the tutors made a point of emphasizing to me at the end of the feedback. He said, it was a pass, but that lesson could have been a lot better. So if you're going for a merit or distinction, I guess don't listen to my advice. But I want to maybe give my thoughts on. But here's the thing, right? With the Delta, on the one hand, if you do an in-person course on a campus like International House Chiang Mai or wherever, it's a significant financial investment, and it's a lot of money. To fail, which is why everybody was so stressed out when we were taking that course. On the other hand, if you're going to be in the English language profession for any length of time, it's advantageous to get a Delta. It's definitely going to open up career opportunities and at many schools a higher rate of pay. And the earlier you get it done, the more advantageous it is because the earlier you can take advantage of these career opportunities. It's something that's much better done at 27 than it is at 40. I was 40 when I did it myself, and there are people who are older than me on that same course, but there are also people who are in their 20s, and so the ideal situation, you get your CELTA, you spend 3 years working at a school where you're getting a lot of where you're getting observed a lot, and where the manager has qualifications that enable him to observe you, like the manager's got a Delta himself, and they're giving you very useful feedback and they're being critical of your lessons. And after 3 years of doing that, then you're ready to do the Delta. Unfortunately, a lot of people do not come in with those ideal circumstances. What a lot of people do, and this includes myself for a number of years, you come off the CELTA, you put an amazing amount of work into the lesson because you want to pass the CELTA. So you spend 2 whole days planning for one lesson, and you're up all night rehearsing, and you just exhaust yourself, and you pass the CELTA. And then you get to a language school, and now you're not a trainee anymore, you're an employee, and you're given a schedule where you have to teach not one class in 2 days, but you have to teach 3 classes tomorrow. And also, you've got your own life to live. You don't want to spend your whole life stressed out like you do on the CELTA. So very quickly you begin to cut corners at language school. And this is definitely the pattern I fell into my first school post-CELTA, where I was only given one initial observation, just to make sure I was competent in the classroom, and after that the school left me alone, which I appreciated at the time because nobody likes getting observed, but that actually was not good for my long-term professional development, did not prepare me for the Delta. And then I fell into the pattern a lot of teachers do, where you're following the textbook, you open up the textbook, you see a grammar points followed by exercises, and you think to yourself, okay, the students are going to get bored. What's a game? What's a game I can use with this grammar point? And you find a game, and you find a few games, and you find a few games that you get quite good at setting up and running. And you learn how to entertain the students and entertain them. By entertaining them, you're able to survive as a teacher and get through. And you also, if you stick in the industry for any length of time, probably have a bit of rapport with the students. They like you, you like them, you get a lot of positive feedback from them every day, and this makes you feel happy and confident in your job. And that's not the good situation to be in coming into the Delta, because very quickly what happens is you forget all your CELTA training very quickly. And then after a few years of doing that, you think, okay, it's time to move on to the Delta, but you're actually less prepared than you would have been if you had done it when you were fresh off the CELTA, because you've actually not developed in the way that the Delta wants you to, and in fact you've forgotten a lot of what you learned on the CELTA. Okay. So this would have been me if I had done the Delta from Cambodia, and so in a lot of ways it's very good that I didn't, that I had that hiccup signing up for the Delta in Vietnam, because as part of that, I changed to a school where I was getting observed regularly by managers who were giving me critical feedback. And this was difficult for me because I had been coming from a school where I'd been getting a lot of positive feedback and had felt like I was very comfortable in my role and was very confident in what I was doing. And then I switched to a school where the managers were not impressed that I had a fun game. They kept saying, okay, but your staging was all wrong. Your staging was all wrong. And then, this was stuff that was vaguely familiar for me from way back when I did the CELTA, but stuff that I had not focused on, and was also not used to being observed regularly. But through getting observed regularly and through getting that critical feedback, which was devastating to me at the time, but which I tried to react to because I didn't like getting I didn't like getting that negative feedback. So I tried to adjust my lessons so that I wouldn't get that negative feedback from the managers. That was actually, I think, in retrospect, the perfect solution, exactly what I needed to prepare me for the Delta. Um, as well as I had a very good manager at the time I was applying for the Delta. And he said, why don't I just observe you a couple times? This won't be an official observation. It won't go on your record, but just to give you some feedback to get you ready for the Delta. So even though it was an official observation, I wanted to look my best. So I spent a lot of time preparing a lesson and delivered the lesson. And then after the lesson, he said to me, I'm glad we did that observation because there are a number of blind spots that are in your teaching that I want you to become aware of before you do the Delta. And I was like, oh, again, it was not pleasant to hear, but it was good feedback that it was necessary feedback for me. So his criticism, it was a language point, and it was a point where I was trying to get the language from the text. So there's a reading text, and then the grammar point was being extracted from that. And what I did was I started off the lesson by explaining the grammar, and then I had the students go into the reading text. And he was like, no, 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 no. First, you set the context. You get the students interested in the topic. Then you use that topic to get them into the reading. Then you use the reading you do the reading for comprehension first, and then after they've comprehended the reading, then you do a noticing activity to get them to notice the language. Then you focus on the meaning, and again, just basic staging. And yes, so I don't want to give the impression that you need to be a superstar teacher to pass the Delta, because I certainly wasn't, and certainly when I got to the Delta, and when I was watching my classmates, my other trainees, do their lessons, I was very relieved to realize that none of them were superstars either. They looked just as nervous and awkward and stiff up in front of the classroom as I did. And now, granted, I'm sure we were all nervous because we were getting evaluated and stuff like that, and I'm sure we would have all been much more comfortable back in our own classrooms, back in our regular environment. But yeah, that was something that was a great relief to me from day one, is saying, okay, none of these people are superstars either. But in my opinion, the people who struggled with it the most were people who had, again, been working in jobs where they weren't getting a lot of critical feedback, and had just relied on rapport with the students or fun games with the students. And that is not something that is valued by the Delta. I think one of the tutors said to us very early on, he said, I don't care if the students are having fun. Now, of course, if you come from a language school background, really in even most backgrounds, the success of the lesson is evaluated by how much fun the students are having. So that's how the pattern a lot of us have fallen into, or consciously or unconsciously been trained up in, is to just get the students having fun. And that's not at all what they're looking for on the Delta. So there was, yeah, there were people who really struggled, and of course, it's not at all pleasant to get that negative feedback when you're on a course like this. So there was one guy I remember, he was really depressed because he was failing his lessons, and he said, I thought I was good at this. I thought I was good. I and I think he was a classic case of a guy who really had good rapport with his students, really had fun in the classroom. They were reacting very positively to his lessons, but he wasn't staging it properly, or he wasn't actually getting through these skills that you need to get through to pass the Delta lesson. On the other hand, again, you do not need to be a superstar necessarily. I was talking to a teacher trainer, somebody who had been a CELTA tutor for years, and then after being a CELTA tutor for years, had trained up to become a Delta tutor. And he was telling me about his experience becoming a Delta tutor and shadowing the other Delta tutors. And he said, I was surprised at how low the bar was to pass a lesson. This is what he told me. He said that there were some lessons that would have been a pass on the CELTA, but they wouldn't have been anything spectacular. Wouldn't have even been a pass A on the CELTA, but they were also getting passes on the Delta. Um, so yeah, I don't want to say, of course, that you could come off just barely passing a CELTA and then do all right on the Delta, but you don't need to have an absolutely perfect. You don't need to be a superstar teacher per se, but you do have to have like those basics of staging down, and the yeah, the very basic techniques down, I think. And for most people, this is going to be 3 years at a school where you're getting regular feedback from your managers. Okay, I don't want to belabor that point, so I'm going to move on next. I think I'm going to jump into talk to Module 3. So I had mentioned before that I had hoped to just get everything done within 2 months. I said I just want to sign up for a course, do it face to face, get everything done in 2 months, and then not have to worry about it anymore. You you can get module 1 and 2 done maybe in the course of 2 months, and it depends a little bit. It depends a little bit on the center. Some centers will separate out module 1 and 2, and some centers will integrate them. Because I had already done module 1 by distance, when I went to Chiang Mai, they had a 2 month course, and I showed up after the first 2 weeks. I actually, because it had been a bit of a gap in time after I had done module 1, I tried to sign up to do module 1 again at Chiang Mai. Unfortunately, the tutor talked me out of it. He said, no, you've already done module 1. You don't need to do it again. And I said, yeah, I know, but it was years ago and I've forgotten. And I said, that the knowledge from module 1 is going to help me with module 2. And he said, nope, nope, nope. He said that it's going to be mostly exam prep, learning how to do the exam. He said, if you already do module 1, just don't pay the extra money. Don't come early. Just come for module 2. Other centers though integrate them, and I think this had been true. The course in Vietnam before it got canceled was module 1 and module 2 were integrated throughout that 2 months, and so that case, if I had done it in Vietnam, it would have been harder to separate them out. I would have had to just retake module 1 as part of the package. But whatever, whichever way it is, module 3 cannot be done during those 2 months. Module 3 is much more of a long-term project, which you need 3 or 4 months to do. So, despite my ambitions to get everything done in that 2 months or 6 weeks face to face, I still had to do module 3 afterwards. Now, yes, so module 3, it's not nearly as stressful as module 2, but I did find, I think a lot of people find this. Coming off of module 2, it's like, oh, it was like the worst 2 months of my life. I'm so glad that's over. And then very quickly January comes again. We finished in December. You have a month to breathe, and then all of a sudden it's January, and it's time to gear up towards module 3. And I had a very hard time gearing up again for that, which I think a lot of people do. Module 3 is you have to write a syllabus. Now the big thing about module 3 is the word limit. So this was true on the this was true with everything on module 2. You had the weekly essays in module 2 in which you were constantly fighting the word limit. This is the same thing on module 3. You've got all this information you need to get in there in a very limited amount of words, so you're constantly editing it and re-editing it and just trying to get that down into the word limit. And they are extremely strict on that word limit. You're over by one word, and they will fail it, or not fail it, just refuse to mark it. So aside from the word limit, the other thing to keep in mind with module 3 is everything needs to be connected. So you choose a specialism. In my case, I chose young learners because I was teaching a group of young learners at the time. And then you've got to research the specialism and say, okay, well, these are the points about this specialism. So in my case, it was these are the points about teaching young learners. And then you've got to have a class, and this is a class you have access to, students that you're teaching. And you've got to write a profile of them and give them a needs analysis. But that needs analysis needs to be connected to the profile, to the points you did talking about the main points about teaching that specialism. So you say, okay, I chose to do this needs analysis because of these points I found during my research about teaching the specialism. Then you need to say, okay, because of what I found out in my needs analysis, I've chosen to do this diagnostic test. Then you need to say, because of what I found out in this diagnostic test, I've chosen to do this curriculum. And then you need to say, okay, because of this curriculum, I've chosen to do this assessment. So everything has to be linked back. You can't just say, okay, here's a diagnostic test I'm using. You have to justify why you're using that diagnostic test in terms of everything else that's come before, in terms of your needs analysis, your learner profile. Now, this is where I got into trouble, and where a lot of people get into trouble is let me back up. Module 3 is done by distance. It has to be done by distance, but you need a tutor for it. It's very difficult to pass Module 3 without a tutor because, as with everything with the Delta, the format is very specified. So the tutor will say, no, that's not right. You've got to change to write it like this. This is what Cambridge is looking for, etc. So you've constantly got to be adjusting that. So the tutor would give us weekly deadlines. Say, okay, by this week, have your needs analysis done. Then by this week, have your diagnostic test done. And because I was so over it, I did not want to do any more Delta at that point. And because I was back to working full time and everything like that, I would do it on the weekend. Just say, oh, okay, let me just finish this up. Do this week's part, send it off to the tutor. And I was never really thinking ahead. And then it's like, oh, the diagnostic test. Okay, what am I going to do for the diagnostic test? But I made it much more difficult for myself because it's much easier if you're thinking ahead about what the next steps are going to be. So when you're designing your needs analysis, you're deliberately choosing questions that are going to make it easier for you to design the diagnostic test. And when you're designing the diagnostic test, you're deliberately choosing material that's going to make it easier for you to design your curriculum. And when you're designing your curriculum, you're deliberately thinking about how you're going to do the assessment. And when you have piecemeal deadlines, like most tutors do, it's very easy to just lose sight of the big picture. So, um, I did end up passing module 3 in spite of this. Again, it was only a pass, no merit or distinction. But I think I would have made my life a lot easier if I had gotten my head around the general concept about how all these elements of a syllabus are related. To that end, there's a couple very useful books which I recommend reading from cover to cover before day one on Delta Module 3. This was not the way I did it, and I still managed to pass somehow. You know, it is still possible to pass, but I think my life would have been a lot easier if I had read Syllabus Design by David Nunan and Designing Language Courses by Kathleen Graves. I've reviewed both of these books on my weblog, and I'll link to my review of them down below. But of these two, especially the book by Kathleen Graves, Designing Language Courses by Kathleen Graves. It's not, yeah, it's there are a few things on there which are different than Cambridge specifications, and offhand I don't actually remember what those are. But I do remember reading it and realizing to myself that she's got some steps in there that are different than the Delta. So you can't use everything in there, but the general idea about how all these elements are constantly connected and how all these elements are constantly in a state of revision in relationship to each other. If you get your head around that before you start Delta Module 3, you will be in a much better position to begin it. And I wish I had done that, but I managed to muddle through somehow. I got just a few minutes left before the end of this video here. I'm on a camera that records for 30 minutes at a time. Since I'm talking about everything I did wrong, I guess maybe one last point I want to make is I've become aware by working with teacher trainers that the best way to make use of the Delta after you get it is to spend a couple years in the classroom after you get the Delta practicing what you've learned. Because it's not like you come out of Module 2 and you know everything and you're a superstar teacher. You come out with Module 2 with a lot more ideas about how to do things. But it's only 6 weeks or 2 months or whatever it is. You need time to actually consolidate that in the classroom. I think 2 years is recommended. Unfortunately, I was working for an organization in which it's quite common to either get your Delta after you've been promoted into management, or to get the Delta and then immediately go into management thereafter. And I think, unfortunately, in a lot of schools, the pay incentives make that likely. And again, the Delta is a significant financial investment. But the ideal way is to take the course and then stay in the classroom for a couple more years before moving into teacher training or management. Unfortunately, that's not what I did. At least that's not what I did initially. Although I've since getting that advice have changed jobs, so that I'm back in a place where I'm in the classroom more. And now that I'm in the classroom more, I'm trying to go back and re-engage with that Delta material. So yeah, that would just be my final piece of advice before I finish off the video. It would be interesting. I don't know how useful this video is going to be. I realize this is rambling. It's been a rambling video, but hopefully maybe this would be useful to somebody considering doing a Delta, and perhaps people who have already done it could chime in the comments with their own experiences, because it would be interesting to see how much these experiences differ. Different centers, different tutors, different areas of the world, different backgrounds, something like that. So yeah, let me know in the comments what your thoughts are, and I'm going to finish off here.